Hello and welcome to Petersfield Museum's third digital talk, The Changing Face of Petersfield High Street. My name is Lauren and I'm the Education Assistant at the museum. I will be your guide through the many changes that have occurred in the High Street over the last 1,000 years. Please feel free to leave any questions in the comments below. If you watch this video live, you can leave us any comments or questions in the live chat function and I will try and answer these as we go along. Alternatively, please join us for a live Q&A after the talk, where I will happily answer all your questions. I hope you enjoy this talk. Now, without further ado, let's begin. Petersfield High Street was one of the earliest streets to be formed in the town and has remained the focal point for business ever since. This talk will focus on some of the Petersfield businesses that are typical to a high street, both past and present. While most of these businesses have been located along the high street, it also takes into account more recent developments, like Round's Walk, which have extended Petersfield High Street. The earliest plots of the town were laid around the Market Square and along the principal street, now known as the High Street. It is still possible to identify some of these earliest property boundaries if you look at the Physic Garden. Each new settler, or burgess, were granted a plot of land approximately 60 foot by 300 foot, which was known as a burgage plot. On this, they could build their dwelling and workshop, with some garden on which to grow food or feed their household. The sights, sounds and smells of Petersfield medieval High Street would have been quite different from today. A livestock market took place along the High Street until 1780, when it moved to the square and placed in a shambled market. On market days, the streets would have been noisy with the sound of animals being driven out the street, either to the market or to the shambles for shelter. As a result, the street would have stunk. At other times, you may have smelt the aroma of home-brewed beer or bread baking. In Tudor times, the name of the street was Baker Street. Bakers played an important part in everyday life, for they baked not only bread, but dishes prepared by housewives. This photo was taken around 1880 and is one of the earliest photos we have of the town. Many of the high street buildings shown here no longer exist, such as the Nickel Pharmacy on the left-hand side and the John Baker Butcher Shop on the right. These sites are now home to Boots and Superdrug, respectively. We will return to these properties later, but for now we will head to the other end of the high street. Our first stop is at number 13 The Square, an address that no longer exists. Circled in this picture, it has had multiple identities prior to its demolition, most recently as a newsagent's and car shop. In the early 19th century, it was a country bank run by a partnership, one of whom was Henry Austen. Austen, a London financier and Jane Austen's favourite brother, was a founder of several banking businesses, including the Petersfield Bank. Henry's banks, including ones in Petersfield and Aughton, all flourished during the Napoleonic Wars of France. Petersfield and Aughton were small but prosperous market towns, and the majority of new banks provided loans to farmers and landowners who were benefiting from the agricultural boom. Food imports were difficult to come by, making homegrown provisions a profitable business. But it wasn't to last. After the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, England fell into a post-war depression. Many banks in agricultural areas ran into difficulties and found it impossible to supply cash for banknotes they had issued in better times. Bankruptcies of country banks, which usually total less than 6 a year, totaled 35 in 1816. All of the banks in Henry's little empire failed that very same year. Those that held Austen banknotes found themselves with worthless paper. The Austen family as a whole was badly hit by Henry's failure, with several members losing large sums of money. Despite losing money herself, Jane, like the rest of the family, remained loyal to him. Returning to the more recent past, we will now focus on the Lee brothers. It was in late 1918 that Henry Lee moved his hairdressing and barber's business to number 13 The Square. The men's barber saloon could be found behind a partition, just off the reception area. The Lee family's living quarters were also on the ground floor and included a sitting room and a dining room, with a kitchen being added later. In the sitting room, which bordered the barber's saloon, there was a large chimney stack with fireplaces on each side. Out the back there was a small courtyard. During the 1920s, ladies' hairdressing was added to the business, and a separate saloon was established in the large front room on the first floor. The children of the Lee family slept on the second floor, where a very cautious Mr. Lee fixed a long escape rope to one of his children's beds. He must have feared a repeat of the terrible fire that had occurred in number 2 The High Street in 1908, where the fire had burned so ferociously that the wax mods in the shop window had melted. All the Lee family trained as hairdressers, and after Mr. Lee's death in 1930, the business became known as Lee Bros and was managed by the brothers, Bill and Jack. Bill's son joined the business and continued it after the death of his father and uncle in 1967 and 1977. In 1976, Bailey's bought the ground floor and transformed it into a flower shop by removing the big chimney stack and incorporating the kitchen and part of the courtyard into a large shop area. The gentleman's hair saloon moved upstairs, and the business continued there by Frank Lee until it was closed in December 1990. Despite being 300 years old and a building worthy of merit, number 13 The Square was not listed. It was demolished in the early 1990s to make way for Ram's Walk. The land behind the High Street was once filled with meadows and Burgess plots, as we can see from this photo. The first step towards the scene we see today came in 1961, with the completion of the first phase of the central car park. A few decades later, the next stage of this site's development began. A meeting was held in November 1985 to discuss a proposed supermarket on the central car park site. Over 300 people arrived to hear the proceeding, causing an uproar which the police had to attend to keep order. The meeting was postponed and held at the Festival Hall a fortnight later, where more than 400 people attended. Many firms were interested in developing the site, and their identities were being kept strictly confidential. Town traders feared the loss of custom, with increasing numbers of shoppers driving to out-of-town superstores in Waterlooville, Havant and Chichester. They felt this was a good enough reason to accept a new supermarket in the centre of town. Others feared that the development of the central car park would mean a reduction in the number of parking spaces, though these fears were overcome by the promise that no parking spaces would be lost. It was agreed by a large majority that a 20,000 square foot upmarket store would benefit the town as long as the central car park survived. There were suggestions that at some point the store should have frontages onto the High Street and Chapel Street, a move which would have destroyed many of the small businesses Petersfield was known for. Designs for deck parking were also rejected after public pressure. By 1987 there were 4 contenders remaining in the race for the contract: Presto, the Gateway and Fair Fine Group, Prudential Assurance, and Waitrose. In January 1988, Waitrose doubled its bid for the contract. The next month, the East Hampshire District Council recommended the bid by Waitrose, whose store would be double the size of the then Gateway store in the High Street, now M&S Food. The Waitrose bid was approved in March 1988, and the work was due to start in January 1989. The journey to this point had been a long, bitter one, with accusations of secrecy and betrayal before, during and after the public inquiry into the saga. The East Hampshire District Council eventually chose the Prudential scheme to deliver the Ram's Walk scheme, and planning permission was given in 1988. There were objections to the compulsory purchase orders for the properties on either side of what is now the entrance to Ram's Walk. This caused a year's delay to the project and forced a public inquiry, but by this time, Gateway, who owned the Fine Fair store on one side of the entrance, had withdrawn from their shop on the square. Demolition of number 13 The Square and number 2 The High Street went ahead in 1991. Number 11 and number 12 The Square were only partly demolished in order to retain their Georgian facade and the medieval timbers inside. Ram's Walk was completed in 18 months in the spring of 1993. Waitrose and some of the other smaller shops opened that autumn. The Waitrose shop became one of the most successful in the country and acted as a magnet by drawing people to the town. Today, number 6 The High Street looks completely different from its neighbour at number 8. But it wasn't always like this. Number 6 and number 8 The High Street were once part of a larger building, dating from around the 16th century. It was positioned on a Burgess plot, which, up until the mid-20th century, was still defined by its ancient walls running from the High Street to the Drum Stream. The front of the plot was originally occupied by a fine timber-framed house with a jettied front. A drawing of the rear of the property, before 2/3 of it was demolished, shows a steeply pitched roof. This suggests that it may have been a medieval hall house, to which chimneys were later added. The building that forms number 6 was probably a later addition to the part that had been demolished. The entire building was eventually disguised by a diaper-patterned brick front with a parapet in the early 19th century, as seen in this photo. This moves it closer in style to the building that we see today. Over its 400-year history, the building has been a private dwelling, a tradesman's house with stabling at the rear, and a boarding school for young ladies. In the 1830s, Gideon Dublock arrived in Petersfield with his family to run a book-selling business, which is a shop we saw in the previous photo. By 1844, he had taken over the entire property. In addition to bookselling, Dublock also sold stationery, was a printer, and ran a library and a reading room. At various points in its history, the original building has been in single ownership and at other times divided into 2. This explains why the original timber-framed building at number 6 still exists and why number 8 was demolished to make way for Woolworths in the 1930s. For most of the 20th century, number 6 was a shoe shop, and today it's home to Willow's Boutique. The current building at number 8 was opened in July 1934. By this time, Woolworths had over 600 stores in the UK, with Petersfield being number 562. On the 26th of November 2008, trading of shares in the Woolworths Group were suspended. All of its 807 stores were closed between the 27th of December 2008 and the 6th of January 2009, resulting in 27,000 job losses. Petersfield branch closed on the 4th of January 2009. It first became a 99p store and then Poundland that we see today. Poundland's next door neighbour was once a large Burgess plot, which included the present-day number 10 and 12. It was divided up sometime before 1773 when the building of a house and a shop occurred. This picture shows the original building on this site. It had a brick front with an attractive diaper pattern and a square bay window with long narrow panes of glass. There had been a chemist on this site for 180 years, since at least 1841. Prior to that, it was a butcher. A few years after the demolition and rebuilding of the Woolworths building, the same thing happened to its neighbour when the original pharmacy building was sold to its present occupiers, Boots, in 1934. Here you can see a close-up of the F.B. Nichols pharmacy shop window. E.J. Baker's was a butcher and fishmonger for many years, with a fruit business being added at a later date. One of the slaughter licenses for the town was issued for this address in 1894. There are recollections of cattle being ushered up the alleyway beside a shop to be slaughtered. After 1911, the shop was rebuilt and modernised, taking it from a Jordan facade with a central door and bay windows to the more modern shop windows that we see in this slide. The building housed a succession of grocers' shops throughout the 20th century, Pink's, Moore's and Lipton's. The shop front has been altered again, although the upper part remains the same as the first build. This was the site of Petersfield's largest coaching inn, the White Hart. The heyday of the coaching inn was in the 16th and 17th century. At this time, Petersfield was a very prosperous town due to its wool, clothing and leather industries. 9 inns are mentioned in the roll call of 1696-7, confirming their continued significance to the local economy. The White Hart was positioned directly on the old London to Portsmouth Road, which roughly runs along Folly Lane across where M&S now stands. It was once part of a large group of buildings, including Windsor House and Rowan's Hospice charity shop. There was a gate room linking them over the old road, and some of the 17th century buildings can still be seen from Folly Lane, as you can see in the right-hand picture. In 1784, the inn was serving as a post office, and it was certainly an inn up until 1799. In the early years of the 19th century, but not later than 1815, John Cross converted the west wing into a private house, which today is Winton House, and the east wing into a shop, transferring the licence to the new White Hart which he had built on College Street. There was once an elegant townhouse of red and blue brick built in the latter half of the 18th century. It was positioned on the right-hand side of where M&S Food now stands. Between 1900 and 1964, number 2123 The High Street was the home of A.W. Child Limited. The business was not only a stationer's, but a printer of the local paper, the Hants and Sussex News, affectionately known as the Squeaker. The paper would later become the Petersfield Post. The building was also home to the owners of Child's, who enjoyed all the comforts of this beautiful townhouse. Inside the house were oak-panelled rooms and a curved staircase. Outside, in the walled garden, there were many beautiful trees and low box hedges outlining all the beds, including the kitchen garden. There was also a lily pond and a fine conservatory where black and white grapes were grown, quite different from the car park that we see on the site today. Later, the front of the property was modernised as a stationery shop, and the ground floor of the townhouse became a bookshop. In the centre of the facade was a small triangular area with a window opening out onto the street, from which newspapers were sold. A.W. Childs Limited continued in business until 1964, when the owner of the premises was granted outline planning permission to demolish the building and erect 3 shops and offices on the site. This was described as the executioner's axe poised over one of the High Street's most picturesque properties. Child's Bookshop, along with its neighbour, the butcher H. Ganner, were demolished in 1964. While some lamented the loss of one of the High Street's most charming properties, not everyone was sad to see it go. An ex-employee of Child's described the building as dirty, decayed and airless, and that it had several times been flooded and inefficiently dried, and smelt oddly. It also had staff facilities of the most primitive nature. For the past 55 years, the modern building has housed a series of supermarkets. First came Gateway Food Market, later replaced by Summerfield, and in November 2006, Summerfield was sold to Marks & Spencer's to trade under the M&S Food brand. The Raglan Property Trust has had a large influence on the look of the modern High Street. By 1962, Raglan was seen as a controlling force in New Petersfield, with more than half of the south side of the High Street in their possession. The company were now applying for permission to develop several sites along the road, including the Charles Bookshop and the 3 buildings that we see on the left of this picture. From left to right, they are the Dolphin Hotel, which was later the Old Girls' High School, the Old Post Office, and Clare Cross. All of these buildings are now on the site of Dolphin Court. The story of Dolphin Court, the complex of flats and shops at the foot of Petersfield High Street, is a controversial one in the history of the town. The story begins in 1960 when the County High School for Girls was closed. At this time, Petersfield was undergoing a dramatic transformation. London development company Raglan Property Trust Limited was driving forward plans to modernise the town. After 3 years being vacant, the Hampshire County Council wished to use the old school as a library. This was refused by the Ministry of Transport, as mobile libraries and other vehicles would block the road, causing traffic problems. The council then asked the ministry if they would like to purchase the site to improve the A3, with a further the site being offered to Raglan at the same time. The town was divided as to whether the town should remain as it was or expand. In November 1963, Flora Torp produced a pencil drawing of the endangered properties in protest against their destruction. The accompanying press article spoke of Petersfield becoming a horrid, ordinary, neon-lighted town. These protests were to no avail, as just 1 year later, Clare's Cross, Charles Bookshop and the old post office were demolished. The future of the girls' high school was deferred by Hampshire County Council for another few months to February 1965, thanks to the lobbying of the recently formed Petersfield Community Association. They joined the already established Petersfield Society to fight for the retention of the historic buildings which had come under threat. A crisis meeting in October 1964 brought together interested parties from the Petersfield Urban Council. It was stated that there was no possible reason for saving the building and that the town needed tidying up. Hampshire County went on to approve Raglan's plan, and in 1965 the former Dolphin Hotel and the Petersfield Girls' High School were knocked down and replaced by Dolphin Court. By 1968, Dolphin Court had been completed and had won an award from the Civic Trust for the category of New Buildings, Restoration and Major Alterations in areas of architectural interest or beauty which pay particular respect to the character of their surroundings. The RIBA assessor stated that Dolphin Court had succeeded in continuing the general texture of the town. A local architect described it as a seaside marine building on the Esplanade, adding that it did not belong in Petersfield. As Flora Torp confessed in a letter to the Petersfield Post in December 1965, "This new development is the ugliest thing I have seen in Petersfield for 40 years, and my one consolation is that I am too old to have to look at it for very long." Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this talk, we have one more coming up next week. Please visit our website for more details. If you'd like to help us continue making digital content like this, you can leave us a donation by clicking on the link. You can also tell us what you thought about the talks by leaving a comment below or on any of our social media pages. That's it from me. If you're watching this live, then hopefully I will see you at the live Q&A straight after this talk. Thanks for watching.